There were no red flags in the beginning, and the process was really great until the very end. Then they decided that they were going to be a pain in the ass. Well, I hate to break it to you, but there was definitely a red flag at some point in that project. Experience didn't allow you to see that. What's up, guys? It is Coffee Break 16. I got a couple questions to answer. And just a reminder, if you have a question that you want to submit, make sure you do it in the comments below. We answer these every week on Monday. And if you guys are listening on the podcast, check out the YouTube video, drop the comments there. First question, has a client ever been cool, normal throughout the project, and then all of a sudden near the end, they suddenly begin to point out things that they don't like or they have issues with? How does this make you feel? Is it taken personally, like more questions you should have asked? Or is it the client's fault for not speaking up or bringing some attention to it? So I think the one thing I want to get right to the point is that if this is the case, I think there's underlying issues, and this isn't something that just all of a sudden sparked their interest to ask these questions at the very end of the project. In reality, what has happened is things have been bothering them throughout the whole process, and this is now just kind of their opportunity to nitpick as you get closer to final payment, or you're completing the job and they want to keep you around longer. They're basically trying to prolong the project. Maybe they're trying to make it look like you're going over schedule or you're not delivering, but there's probably underlying issues throughout the entire project. Now, that could have been a red flag right from the beginning of the job where it just wasn't your client, and maybe you skipped over that because they seemed really nice, or you really want to do the project for your portfolio, or any of those scenarios where you kind of shove the red flags off to the side. And trust me, I've done it. Even very recently, I feel like I've done this. And I sit down with my team and I kind of voice how I'm thinking, and they basically say, yeah, man, like that's a red flag. Let's walk away. Let's move on to bigger and better things. But the underlying issues, there has to be points and things that they're bringing up throughout that project. Now, to answer your question, you have a couple questions here. Yes, I've definitely had that scenario before where they wait to the very end. And I think that's why I bring up those points, is that's exactly what it was. Is they were frustrated with something else, so that they figured at the end of the job they were going to delay payment. So they were going to basically continue to extend the punch list. But this really goes right back to everything, is just the communication throughout the project, and communicating with your client and making sure that you're checking in and having these periodic check-ins. Something that we're actually doing as of today, we've launched, is that we're gonna have this standardized periodic check-in with our client, like, hey, how are we doing? Keep it really simple, just get some feedback and make sure that they always feel as though we're performing at our best. And if they ever get back to us and say, oh, it's okay, or it's good, we know that, hey, we need to correct that. Let's get back up to the fantastic level. So those periodic check-ins are going to be really important throughout the process, but making sure that communication is really thorough. But how does it make me feel, and do I take it personally, like I should have asked more questions? Maybe in some scenarios. In our most recent podcast episode, Modern Craftsman, with the Zen Builder, he talks a lot about taking things personally. If you haven't listened to it, I would really encourage you guys to listen to it, because it's very interesting how he talks about not taking things personally, not something that I'm strong at, and that I think I asked him the question over and over and over, how do I get to that point? How do I get to that point of Zen, I guess, on how I can stop taking things so personally? Because it really is, it hurts, because you feel as though you've delivered such a great product all the way to this point, and then they start nitpicking and you're confused and you kind of go into this, man, am I not doing as good of a job as I thought? And it goes back to, like, are you in tune with your client? This can be even tied into your employees, making sure that you're in tune with them, or your friends, your family, all of these things. Making sure that you're in tune with people and listening to them and getting their feedback on things is so incredibly important, and making sure that you kind of check yourself. And it can be related personally and professionally. And the last point was, is it the client's fault for not speaking up or bringing some attention to it? Unfortunately, no, this is not the client's fault. This is absolutely some way or the other your fault. I think some people will say, no, it could be the client, it could be just a bad client. Yeah, it could be, but that's a red flag, and that should have been why you didn't do work with them, but you chose to work with them. And maybe someone's going to say, well, there were no red flags in the beginning, and the process was really great until the very end. Then they decided that they were going to be a pain in the ass. Well, I hate to break it to you, but there was definitely a red flag at some point in that project that would have ticked you off to know that this was going to happen, and maybe experience didn't allow you to see that, and next time you go into it, you're going to see that, and that's just something that's learned and unfortunately wasn't taught to you through a peer or another builder that you may have worked with. Let's get into the second question. When does money flow from your client to you on your projects? Is it different for different types of contracts, cost plus, time, material, fixed fee, fixed cost, and also the size of projects? I'm a newbie here, starting up as a self-employed carpenter, one-day general contractor, trying to understand common money practices, but can't quite get my head around scaling up to a bigger project without taking on huge financial risk on material and labor outlays. This is an interesting question only because this is something I'm constantly refining. But I'll tell you kind of what we do now. So we've already talked about it in a previous episode multiple times, the pre-construction retainer. And that's usually anywhere from $10,000 to maybe $50,000, depending on the size of the project, that allows us to dedicate office time to breaking down the project, helping develop scope, schedule, budget with the architect design team before we start construction. From there, we take a construction deposit. And that construction deposit is oftentimes 20%. And that 20% deposit goes into a separated account. It's classified, and your accountant will know this if you're working with an accountant. It's classified as unearned income. So it's on your books. It's a liability actually because you haven't earned that money. And the reason it goes in the unearned income is because we actually use that as the second bank account, I'm using air quotes, bank account, to fund the project. And let me explain that. I'm going to do a little math here without a whiteboard, so bear with me. Say we have a $100,000 project and we take 20%, so that's $20,000. Mrs. Smith gives us $20,000, we put it in this unearned income account. Now we have $80,000 left to bill on the project. Now we bill percent complete each month. So say the first month we complete 10% of the project. You go down the line, it adds up, it's 10% of the project. Well, that means we get to bill $10,000 on that project, right? So we're gonna create a bill for $10,000. Well, 10%, we're gonna actually take 10% from two accounts. We're gonna take 10% from the deposit, so $20,000, we're gonna take 10% of that, so that's $2,000. I knew this was gonna be hard without a whiteboard. We're gonna take $2,000 and apply it to that $10,000 bill. Now we have $8,000 left. We're gonna bill the client $8,000. So what that's doing is every single draw, so the next month we do another 10%, we're gonna draw down the deposit and then draw from the client. And that draws the deposit all the way down. So at the very end of the project, we're taking very little from the deposit as well as the main account, and we have a nice chunk of cash, 20% of the project in an account to make sure that we're cash positive. So we bill our clients on a monthly basis, and that 20% generally keeps us ahead of billing. Now, if we were to get into a special occasion where, say, the first month we do 20% and then the next month we have to order $20,000 worth of windows, well, that's more than the deposit we took, so we're going to do a special draw request to bill to make sure that we're not drawing that completely down, that we're billing our special order items on a separate bill. I hope that makes sense. That's how we do it now, but we look at, and we're generally cost plus or time and material on all of our projects, so we don't really fluctuate on that. Now, if we're getting into the multiple $million range for projects, we're gonna have to probably assess whether we take, a 20% deposit on a much bigger job. We very much might do that, but we're gonna have the conversation with, for instance, our accountant to make sure that that financial liability is safe, or that we are putting it into a separate account. There's all these opportunities to make sure that we're protecting that money because, for example, we've had a project very recently that decided to cancel a contract on us, and we had a large deposit. It was over $1 million project, and we had a 20% deposit on it. Well, that money was in that account, so we never touched it. It just sits there in the unearned income. So when they decided to cancel their contract, we were able to defund that account and return their deposit. That's probably going to be a great question that you guys are going to ask in a follow-up episode. So if you guys want to know how you deal with a canceled contract, ask a question below. Any other questions, make sure you ask them below. And we'll see you guys next week on Coffee Break.